No, it's all right. I'll tell Mr. Kalela why I'm in the office. But thank you so much, Liz. I think you're quite right. We've heard some interesting stories about each other. Again, very much work related. I think I met you for the first time in that leadership foundation, yeah, Lincoln Mali Henley. So I think it was
Mm.
quite nice to really meet you face to face eventually. But yeah, man, I'm Chad, and I think thank you so much for inviting me to share my life story as well as my career journey. And I'm sure that maybe perhaps some of the audience members will definitely walk out of the session today feeling very much inspired. I'm hoping that my story will touch so many lives. And I think just before the session started, I'd articulated to you that I'm quite a storyteller. So, hey, I can talk this. So, if it ever gets to a point where I'm just going beyond the allocated time, please feel free to just wave and say, hey, maybe let's move on to the next question. I really wouldn't mind. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names over here, Bodina Poko. So it's quite nice to see you guys. And Mr. Kalela, yes, I'm in the office. The main reason for that is because I wanted to make sure, Hori, I don't necessarily sit with any network interruptions because I respect the audience that's here today, including the host that invited me. Wanted to make sure, Hori, at least the session runs through seamlessly with no particular issues. So that's the whole reason why I'm in the office today. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Chet. I hope Mr. Kalela is answered. Let me check the message.
All right, so I think I will get right into it, Liz.
Cool. They're
Um,
sending you some love. She's sending you some love.
I see the hearts. I see the hearts.
Yeah.
Yes, big and red.
So
Thank you, Sikala.
yes, I think let's delve right into it with your career journey. Maybe you can just start with us like here we are.
Mhm.
How did you start? Where are you now? And yeah, if you could just share that piece.
Yeah, so I think maybe let me start by highlighting the fact that, behind every person who finds themselves, be it in corporate or anywhere, particularly in the various industries, there's a human behind the titles and so on. So I want to first start by maybe perhaps giving a brief description of who Chad is. So Chad is from a small township in the east of Johannesburg called Watema. I'm the last born of four siblings, and then I'm a father of one for now. And I joined Standard Bank, which is the organization that I currently work for, back in 2008. I was about 20 years old at the time, Liz. All right. And I think I just want to go back a bit just so that you guys
I'm doing the
understand how.
math. I'm doing the math. 28, 2008. I'm doing the math.
Yeah, I'll get to the age part. So I think I just wanted to highlight where I come from. So yes, I mentioned that I'm from Gotema. So I think there was a particular life event that happened in 2004. I'm not really going to delve much into the personal stuff because I really want us to focus on the career component. But I think I also wanted to just somehow highlight why Chad is in the way that he is, because I think you and I have had a few interactions. Same applies to other people that have had those personal engagements with me. So in 2004, uh, so I lost my dad, who was murdered. I think I was in grade 11 at the time, who was the sole breadwinner at home. And that, to a certain extent, really affected the livelihood go Kuntlung because he was the only one that was working at the time. I was in grade 11 and I didn't necessarily have money to sort of pay for the school fees at the time. And then I managed to eventually move on to grade 12 and then finished my matric. But then having to now go and start varsity was really, really so much of an issue that I didn't have funding to really proceed with my studies in varsity. But nonetheless, the bit of money that my mom could get at the time was sufficient enough to help me at least start my first year as well as my second year. Then while I was in my second year, my sister then also eventually passed on. So that was now the second knock in a sense of losing a loved one from the family. And my brother also passed on in the same year as my dad. So that then left the liability on my shoulders to really start looking at options of how I can look after my family. So I then made a very bold decision in 2008 to say, you know what, following everything else that has happened, I'm going to rather opt to drop out of varsity, just so that at least I can find a job to assist Kuntum, because it was really bad to a point where, you know, when there's literally no income at home, and mom is not yet qualifying for body pension and stuff like that, I was really forced to start looking for opportunities. It was at that point that I submitted my application to the organization that I work for. And then I started off my career as a call center agent. All right. So I used to take calls with a script and all of that. I think you and I were discussing scripts this morning. So good morning, home loans, you're through to Standard Bank, Chad speaking, how may I help you? So that's how my lines actually started. And eventually, a couple of years later, here I am again, leading a call center in the very same organization that I started in, and the same department that I used to work in is now part of the departments that are reporting into my structure. How interesting is that? So I joined the call center back in 2008. And then about a year later, I moved on to Witbank, and I then worked in one of the branches in Witbank. I think it's in Safeways Crescent, if I remember correctly. And then a year later, I then became what you call a area support officer for the inclusive banking team. So hey, we used to put gazebos on the streets, you know, hey, driving around, opening up accounts, cutting cell phones, and all of that. And while I was in that space, I must say, Liz, that, you know, I think when I started with the bank, my intention was that I was going to further my studies, become a CA. That's what I wanted to do. But I think the leader that I reported to at the time, which is where my turning point and my inspiration of wanting to be a leader started. You know, sometimes we often talk about how good leaders inspire us to be better people or even want to become leaders at some point. For me, it was the complete opposite, right? So I had a leader that was, I'll say in lack of better words, quite difficult to work with, right? Hey, the man was tough, right? But nonetheless, he got the results done, but in a manner that he was leading us at the time wasn't really that great, right? And to a point where I sort of felt to myself that, you know what, I'm going to take the liability of being a leader, just so that at least I can show off how a good leader needs to be. And Liz, that's how my journey into leadership then started, because a few years later, I then got appointed as a team leader in one of the branches in Bedford Gardens. And then I subsequently made my way into becoming a Melrose Arch branch manager. And then after that, there was a big restructure within the organization. Following that restructure, I became a branch manager at our Lakeside Mall branch in Benoni. And then following that, I got a promotion to become one of the distribution heads in Cape Town. And then while I was in Cape Town, another event occurred, right? Because in that process between 2008 and I would say 2020, I did get married. And then of course, while I was in Cape Town, unfortunately, my partner then at the time passed on. And then I had to now come back into Johannesburg, right? Because my son was then, of course, left on this other side. So that's how I made my way back into Joburg. And I was an entrenchment manager. And then following that, I was then, of course, promoted to be in the role that I'm in right now, which is the head of demand generation and retentions within Standard Bank. So it is a long span of various roles that I've been in within the organization, all with a different story to articulate and tell. But I can say to you that I guess my trajectory into leadership was inspired by a leader that I would say at the time wasn't so much of an inspiration, but for me wanting to be the exact opposite of what that leader was. And that's how I then, of course, made my way into where I am today. What's nice about the story is the fact that I guess everyone that has either worked with me or maybe perhaps directly reported into myself will share the fact that Chad is a very different leader, in a sense of someone that genuinely cares about people. And I think as I grew into leadership, I came across really brilliant leaders that have to a certain extent, managed to shape and carve the kind of leader that I am, some of which I think you are also exposed to. Leaders that speak boldly about the fact that if you're looking to really achieve the greatest of performance, it should never be at the expense of the people, where you'd find that you're achieving the results, but then you're leaving blood on the floor. That's not how we should lead. I guess in one of the things that I learned in my leadership role is that when you become a leader, you ought to never forget that you're still human and the fact that you are also leading other human beings. So that is very important, that you at least keep that at the back of your mind while you are basically striving to achieve whatever goals that are being set up to achieve. At the end of the day, for all the organizations that we work for, especially for us that are contracted to specific organizations, we all came into the space with a CV. We all applied to be here. And while we are here, even our subordinates have done the exact same thing. So the fact that I hold a superior title to the next person doesn't necessarily invoke the right for me to be ugly towards the next person. So I guess that's in a nutshell my career journey as I joined the organization, as well as perhaps an articulation of what had happened in my life that subsequently led to me deciding to join the organization. I did eventually, like I said, go on to conclude and complete my studies. So I did complete my degree in accounting science, and I also went on to Henley and completed my NQF7. And right now I'm still busy with my MBA, of which I've just recently been accepted at Henley for that. So it's going to be a rough next couple of years for me, but nonetheless, it is what it is. The intention is for us to really continue forging forward.
Yo, Chad, like I don't know if I'm gonna start on the personal and come back to the career or
Do what
yeah.
you want. Do what you want. Yeah.
So and I think it's quite important to learn that, and we always think for people to be great they have been seeing or having people around them that have been great to learn from, right? And to hear you having someone that you are just like, I'm not going to be like that person, and it helped you through your career years to say, hey, not like that guy. So yeah, for but but maybe let's talk about a moment where you feel like at this moment I was really inspired, I was really fulfilled in my career. And what are some of the key takeouts out of that, man? Like I can hear where, sometimes you're pushed by, I need this, I can't mess it up, but I am making it against all odds. But I just want us to look back and say, there's just this moment. It was great. And I was inspired. I was fulfilled. And this is what I took out of that moment.
Yeah, so I think I'm gonna take you back to the same personal life story, right? Because I think that's where all the decisions stem from. I think, like I said, from my high school days, my aspiration has always been to really be successful in this. And I can tell you that I had actually told myself that there is no way that anything was ever going to stand in my way to prevent me from achieving the goals that I had aspired to achieve. And that's where it started. And when I looked at my situation at the time, what my mother had to go through after having lost, my dad, my brother, and my sister, and having a niece that was also reliant on myself to really just try and assist her to get through high school at the time. That inspired me to really work hard when I basically joined the organization to just make sure that at least my family still has that bit of pride, right? And at least they've got someone that they can rely on and know that if we're ever to at any point pick up a phone and say, Chad, we need the help, at least I'll be able to basically assist with providing and doing whatever that I possibly need to do. That still happens to this day. I know that I think in current concepts, they'll refer to it as black checks. I don't see it in that way, right? Because of the fact that I understand the responsibility that comes with all of that. So I think having to also go back to where I come from and have to realize that I made it against whatever odds that I was faced with at the time. Many would have given up along the way. I think I too at some point. I think when you're submitting seriously and things are not going right, you somehow to a certain extent feel discouraged and hope that maybe things will never basically work out. But at least I guess God was on my side at the time to really afford me the opportunity to work for this wonderful organization. At some point, Liz, I thought of being a taxi driver. And those are some of the things that I thought of. But now I mentioned a taxi driver that wears glasses and Osnam cover and without a gun and all of that. So I'm not sure how that would have materialized, but it's part of the things that really
I think they give you there, like those things, you get them in the industry. So
Young and clever, right? So I think I was a bit too snobbish to really fit the category of being a taxi driver at the time. But those are some of the things that really, I would say, they crossed my mind when things really got tough to say, how do I really look at ways to maneuver the current situation that I found myself in? But nonetheless, I think with hope and determination, I really didn't give up because I remember my first interview with the bank, it didn't go well, and I'd applied to actually be a teller through Quest, and it wasn't successful. But the second interview, like I said, was for a call center agent role, and I made it, right? And with me having to make entry into that particular space, I grabbed that opportunity with both hands. And yeah, I really performed to the best of my ability. And I was able to really do some of the things for, like I said, my family from a provision perspective. And I think looking at my mom now at her age, she's 78, turning 79 this year, old and frail. But the fact that she can still go to bed and know that, you know what, if I say Chad or Skunyane, because that's the name that they use. Now you're privileged to know my other name, hey. So Skunyane is my other name. And Gogo knows for sure that, you know what, my son is there to take care of me and to really take care of my other siblings. So that fact alone, that I'm able to continue doing all of those things and still be able to also provide for my son, keeps me going this. And it inspires me, continues to fuel my energy in a sense of making sure that I achieve everything else that has been set out for me to achieve.
wow, Chad. I'm going to move quickly to, you mentioned you enrolled for your MBA, you've done your accounting science, you've done. So I want to check with you around the personal development and professional development, right? So you started in the call center, but you went up the rank to even coming back and being the head of that department, managing the same actual work that you have done, right? But along the way, you joined the bank without even having a qualification at the time. And of course, circumstances made you drop out, or you just didn't have the means to continue. But to have employment and say, I'm still going to study what you have studied, and even now, while you're the head, still going back to do your MBA. What's your thinking around this professional development and, yeah, just personal development in general?
Well, it's a very studying and learning, right, has no age limits, right, or even restrictions, right? So I think for me, the continuous development is quite critical for my career advancement. Noting the fact that my career aspirations extend beyond my current role. I think maybe we can count a couple of years from now, maybe perhaps, who knows, I may just be your next CEO, right? So, so ideally, that's where I'm going, right? I think it's in line with also my PDP, in the sense of the fact that I really want to grow into the rest of Africa regions, to understand the business much more holistically, and also particularly from a decision-making perspective. These qualifications, they help a lot, Liz, in a sense of how we apply ourselves in the business. So that's why I then, I guess the hunger to continue learning never ceased, right? And mainly because of the fact that I guess one day when you have to pull a chat profile, it needs to be very much, I would say, beefed up, if I may use that particular word, to really afford you the ability to advance into the next role without your credibility being questioned. So I guess that's the whole reason why I'm basically studying for my own particular reasons. And I won't stop now. And I think, Liz, to a certain extent, at some point, I also want to get my PhD so that when I guess when you refer to a Chad, you'll have a DR, Chad Tshabalala there in front. So it's just an aspiration and a passion for me to just continue learning. I think I've enjoyed it. And even with the institution that I managed to further my studies with, it's been quite really nice to study with them to a point where I got to say, you know what, I really want to continue with this. But Chad, I'm very determined to really advance in my career right now. There is no what do you call this thing, glass ceiling for myself. Really sky's the limit. So I guess whatever that I expect from my team, it's what I also continue to show, right? So I need the people that I lead to have the hunger to want to advance and grow. I need the people in the environments that I come from to want to have the same determination to want to advance and grow. And I think when afforded with those opportunities, that's what I want to portray. That if you've got the opportunity, grab it with both hands and continue to develop yourself so that you can advance further. I understand that we may potentially come from different backgrounds and share different challenges, but don't let your background dictate your future. If you can, like I said, grab a particular opportunity and try and push yourself to advance in your career, do it. Especially if you've got maybe perhaps an organization that can support you, or even the means to take out loans and facilities to be able to fund your own studies. Don't let your background dictate where you can basically go to or limit you from your own aspirations.
And it's also so encouraging, Chad, when you say, I have seen this education helping me, even in the decision that I am making. But also, I think you mentioned it in the first piece where you say, as leaders, we are human, right? So sometimes we want to get into these roles and be like, hi, I've arrived. I don't want anything more, but also to still say, I'm hungry for this other things. As much as I want to see the development of my people, I also want to develop, and I have a clear goal of where I'm going, and I don't have ceilings for myself. I am going to push for the things that I want, but I'm not going to forget the people that I lead. I'll lead by example, but I'll also just help them to still have that hunger. I think that's a great point. I want to check with you. You know, we always talk about this concept of mentorship and sponsorship, and you get coaches, executive coach. No, it's busy, it gets very busy. So I want to check with you. Have you really been leaning on maybe mentors? Would you say like you have this the structure around mentors where you lean on and or you use it as an instrument? And if it's that, how do you really approach this mentorship things? You can also add the fancy ones, the sponsorship and the coaching ones. Can call them a lot of things, but I want to know. And also as a leader, how do you also use that tool or as an instrument of perhaps to your people as a leader? Do you want people that are mentored somewhere else? But maybe let's start with you and then we can then circle back to how do you then approach
Yeah.
it with teams? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think let me start with myself, right? In my view, Liz, mentorship is very, very, very important for anyone for that matter. I guess in my space, I also have a mentor that really, I think, as much as I was passionate about learning, but that mentor also played a very important role in a sense of pushing me to study and making sure that I commit to whatever that I said I'll basically do. And over and above that, they held me accountable. They taught me to read the room. They taught me about corporate politics, right? Which is something that we don't ever want to talk about, but it exists. So they taught me about all of those things. And also they served as a mirror reflection for myself to just be able to point out my blind spots. And also they were a safe sort of platform to vent. You know, when you incorporate, you can't just go around and telling people your business or how you hate that leader and all of those things. You need to be careful of where you go to basically vent and engage, especially on things that impact your work, or even where you somehow get to start feeling the imposter syndrome. I'm sure you know what I'm basically making reference to, where you get to a space where you feel like, you know what, I'm not good enough here. and where you start doubting your capabilities and all of those things. Because I think as I advanced in my career, I did get to the point as well where I felt like, ish, how did I even get here, right? Am I doing things wrong all the time? Am I capable of delivering on these things? Where I started really doubting myself. But having that mentor was somehow good enough for me to be able to at least have someone on my corner that is able to at least encourage and support me whenever I wasn't feeling so great, where I could go to and vent and say whatever that I needed to say. And those people would potentially also guide me on what is it that I need to do so that at least I can show up better the next day. And I think with that particular support, I was able to sort of shape my leadership qualities and how I also show up at work, how I also show up when I'm running my presentations, or even in delivery of whatever productivity expectations that I had to bring up, just so that I don't often just rely on the fact that, yes, sis, Lizzie hates me, Lizzie doesn't like this, Lizzie doesn't like that. So me getting that guidance was very much important in a sense of guiding how I showed up. And I think you also asked the question of whether or not, I guess, in my space, be it whether I hire or bring in people into my environment, do I need people that are being mentored? Not necessarily, right? So I personally hire on thingy, on character. You know, if you are coming into the space and really showing good character and willingness to learn, Les, I'm willing to work with you, right? Skill alone, qualifications alone are not enough to really earn you a role in a particular environment, but your ability and willingness to learn is what most leaders actually enjoy working with. I would say me in particular, let me say most, but myself, right? Because of the fact that I know that the skill can be taught. And once you acquire the skill, as long as you've got the right character, you'll possibly be able to help us get the results that we're basically looking for. Mentorship, as well as the rest of the other support that you may need as you proceed to continue executing on your role, are things that we can provide, I guess, within my space to just help you to get the necessary support that you need. Coaches are also important, right? Because at least they're speaking to your direct deliverables at work. They're able to guide you in a sense of how you need to basically show up as well. What is it that you need to say? Don't say this, position things in this particular way. Sponsors, your advocates, right? So they're able to speak for you in rooms that you can't necessarily get to yourself. So I think all of those are really important in a sense of everyone's career advancement. And I guess even just for you to just have a safe place to go to say, you know what, I can go to Simphiwe Phakathi and vent, right? And just pour my heart out and say, as in Priami, things are not going great at 17. I feel like my boss is like this and like this. And no, Guti, whatever that you said in that space is safe, and that you'll also be able to get the necessary guidance from someone who's objective, who's not necessarily always going to take your side, but will be able to also show your shortcomings and say, brah, I think your personality is A, B, and C. And because you are feeling in this particular way, your behavior and response to certain things may be a bit construed. And somehow you may potentially need to just try and align yourself so that at least you can survive better in that particular environment. Yeah, you came right in time, Simphiwe.
That
Cool.
example, I don't know if I can vent today. I must vent about him. Um, so Reggie asked, what is your take regarding the recent revelations of executive presenting fake qualifications and experience? And I think this was more on your point around the studies and
Yeah.
going to get a doctor title as well.
Hey, you see, Reginald now wants to throw me under the bus, man. Reginald, who are those executives with fake qualifications? A part of me doesn't want to comment on this, but I would say that it's really unfair, noting the fact that we have so many unemployed graduates in the country, Liz, that are deserving of those opportunities. We have so many people that are occupying roles with the necessary expertise that can occupy those spaces. But we can never know exactly what led to certain decisions being made. So I think, Reggie, you're putting me on a very tight corner there with that particular qualification. But to that particular question, I meant to say, but to just cover it shortly, I find it a bit unfair because there are people that are far more deserving to occupy those particular spaces. I hope I'm covering your question, Reggie. As diplomatic as I want to sound, I didn't want to comment on that.
And I saw some showing a shock. Kantism, you don't know that I vent about you to you. Anyway, so if we could, and just make, we have a lot of people that are still navigating their career journeys, not necessarily young by age, but could be where they think they still going to develop and things like that. So I would want to just hear your advice, Chad, around literally starting off. I think you gave us your journey, how you started off, and the things that drove you through the journey. But for someone that is just literally starting off, maybe let's just call them the youth because we are a youth
Mm.
platform. I know there's a lot of people that are
As
not
as so, right?
youth.
As so.
But what would be your advice in starting off and obviously just journeying through the career?
Yeah, so I think for me, the advice is when you get into corporate, right? Especially when you want to grow. Grow, I meant to say. I've tend to pick up that. I think with the youth coming in now, unlike us, the seasoned and older ones, right? They are in a quick rush to grow and all of that. But I think growth also takes a bit of patience. It takes a bit of entrenchment. So you need to really try to entrench yourself in a particular role, gain the expertise that are necessary. But also you need to really try and adapt to the new ways of doing things, right? Because a lot of things have changed. So you really need to keep up with the times and more so also make sure that academically you are also positioning yourself in a space where at least your likes of your Sydney DEMA, if they are keen on bringing you into their spaces, at least you meet the necessary accreditations for you to be able to grow into that space. It requires a bit of dedication, Liz, patience. I think I too, without having to really also not mention some of the other aspects. I was also quite hungry, I think, when I got to the organization. I think I spent plus minus 1 year in each role because of the fact that I really wanted to see myself growing. But recently, I found myself, I guess, in having a conversation with the guys that I lead, that growth is not always vertical, right? But sometimes it can also be, to a certain extent, horizontal, right? So you having to move from one department to the next and learning a new skill, learning new capabilities, that can also be growth. You don't always have to be growing up the corporate ladder, where you can just change the environment because maybe you've been in one space for too long. That can also speak to the growth component. And please get yourself mentors so that you can be able to get the necessary guidance of what is it that you need to do so that at least you can be able to get the necessary assistance to advance.
And how do they tackle the obstacles? And my thinking is, like you say, in our times, we knew that you had to save time and maybe be recognized by someone. That we would even get guidance, right? Say, but when you can lead people, and someone throw you in it and say, okay, she has done well. But
Mm.
now you have people that come in the job and be like, no, this is not for me today. I'm leaving today. It's done. How do we build the resilience again and some of those obstacles that we get to meet? I mean, life happens. I think your story as we started, I cannot even imagine that you bury this person today, you bury another person today, you bury your own partner, and you still have to make career decisions. How do we build this muscle? And I think for me, it's also that just that mental muscle where we have a name for everything today. It's either an imposter syndrome or a depression or mental this or mental that, that people are really like we have quite a different battle than maybe 10 years ago. Maybe we just didn't have names for them then. But how do
Mm.
we just make sure that we build that, especially for the generation that is coming, that we don't in essence lose? Because I feel like the experiences, you are able to do what you're doing now because you have served in the same department. You know some of the things, you can talk to them. But then what happens when no one wants to serve anyway? We all want to lead or we all want to be great in something. So who's going to do the groundwork, and how do we just build that muscle and remove some of those obstacles?
Liz, I think I'm going to answer this question a bit differently, right? Um, we all come from different environments, and I guess even our stay in the roles or I guess organizations that we work for is very much influenced by the environments that we come from. So look at Chad, for example. If I had options, right, at the time, like the leader that I was making reference to say that he's the one that actually inspired me to want to grow and be a leader, right? If my immediate decision at the time was that I can't tolerate this leader, and my first sort of point of departure would be that I just want to resign and leave, right? I would have left the organization with nowhere else to go, right? But because of the fact that the environment that I come from didn't necessarily allow for such decisions to be made, I then had to make the decision to say I will stay here and that I will also just try to navigate and be mature enough to understand the fact that myself and this particular individual are contracted to this organization. He's got his own scorecard that he needs to achieve. I've got my own that I need to achieve. So then therefore we need to, a certain extent, find a way to work together so that we can at least be able to, I guess, work in harmony and at the end of the day obtain the results that we're looking for. But in the meantime, because of the fact that I need to change this environment, it may not happen immediately, but I'm going to do everything else necessary to equip myself with the necessary tools so that at least I'm eligible to make my next move. And I guess that's the decision that I basically had to make. And I guess every other individual that comes into any other role, you are inspired by where you come from, as well as your fallback, I guess, support that you may potentially have. I mean, if you've got parents, for example, that you know, I've got a bedroom that I can go back to in the event that I decide to resign, my parents are still working, you may potentially make wrong decisions quite quickly because of the fact that you know that you've got someone that you can basically fall back on. But for people that know that, I guess, what I have right now is my treasure, then your decision making to a certain extent influences those particular things because you know that there's no one else that I can basically fall back on. You are forced to then say, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to stay in this environment. I'm going to find ways of how I can basically navigate this relationship in order for me to advance. So environments are not the same for everyone. I know that there's certain spaces where, regardless of how much motivation I may try to exert on this platform, it may not work because the environment is that toxic, right? But there are others where it's honestly a matter of I can actually stomach this thing for a while I'm actually trying to really, like I said, equip myself in order to be able to maybe advance at a particular future date. I hope I've covered your question, Liz.
You did, you did. You must give Charlotte an increase when you get to work. Charlotte has just been at it from the beginning.
It's unfortunate that this is not a work platform. So, hey.
Yeah, so we actually just almost at the end, you give me your closing part, just
Yeah.
encouraging people also in the chat to send the questions. We're not going to stay very long after the session, but yeah, we've talked about your journey. In closing, I think you mentioned it as well that these journeys are not always vertical, they can be horizontal as well. And that again, it's also growth because some things you're gonna need them as you go up, but you'd have to grow them somewhere else at another level before you can carry them upwards. We are closing now. What do you leave my people with?
So I think, Liz, careers and growth are not really in the hands of someone that is standing outside of you, right? Everyone needs to take ownership of their own lives and where is it that they want to be. And then you need to also look at what measures do you want to put in place in order for you to be able to get to where you want to be. Many a times we tend to find people that would walk into organizations and say, Liz does not want to grow me, or Liz is not putting measures in place to try and help me get to where I need to be. You must never forget the fact that you are responsible for your own growth, What Liz can do for you is she can enable you by providing necessary resources, the time that you need for you to go and study, the time that you need for you to go and basically acquire a new skill, and make sure that she provides the necessary support for you to be able to advance. But in a sense of you being able to grow from one position to the next, it is never Liz's responsibility, but it is up to you to show up in a sense of giving the time and really being proactive in a sense of striving to where you want to be.
Absolutely. Sim is asking if you have, sorry if you have answered this, what has been the most challenging moment in your career and how did you overcome this? It's easy to talk about the highs, but the lows are what build character. So please share if you haven't already, and if you shared, reshare.
All right, cool. So I think this question was asked, but I covered, I think, the part that somehow created the Chad that we are seeing today, the hardworking Chad, the Chad that is passionate about people, the Chad that wants to grow, simply the Chad that wants to be a doctor, the Chad that wants to somehow one day be a CEO is because of the fact that it is inspired by my parents. It is inspired by my background in a sense of where I come from. I really went through a tough, I guess, journey in my teen years as Simpiwe that may have potentially resulted in me not being here today. But because of those life events, I then had to make a conscious decision to say, I'm going to take ownership of my life and make sure that at least I'm able to advance my career and get to, I guess, places that my parents could never even get to. So I remember when I first got my managerial role, I was so excited because not ever in my whole entire life did I ever think that I'd be able to get into that particular space. And when I made it to head, yes, I was even more excited that I've broken boundaries. And I think that is what inspired me at the time. But when we're speaking of a particular life event that is speaking to really things not being easy or a challenging moment in my life. I would say it was back in 2021, like I highlighted, when I was in Cape Town, 6 months down the line from leaving Gauteng and having to go to the Western Cape to pursue a better opportunity. It was at the peak of COVID. And I'm there in Cape Town. And then I wake up to some sad news that the partner has passed on. I mean, you are on the edge of the country, right at the bottom of the country from GP. I'm 2 hours, I think 2 hours away. They were in lockdown, flights are not moving. There's someone has just passed on, Liz. What do you do? Right. And now I had to move from Cape Town and come to this side, of course, to attend to the funeral. But while I was on that other side, again, you're faced with the grieving that you need to go through, Liz. You're faced with I think it's a matter of feeling bad for your decision making, the guilt in a sense of did I have to potentially go to Cape Town and basically stay there and leave this whole thing behind, regardless of whatever the situation was at the time. But that element of self-blame and all of those things that you're going through affect you as a person. They affect your productivity. They affect how you show up at work, right? So I think it was a tough moment for me at that particular time. I've got a son who's a GP, right? And now I'm in Cape Town and going through all of that. I then needed to make a decision to say, you know what? I can't be in Cape Town while my son is on that other side. And this thing has happened. And that's how I then made a decision to say, let me come back to Gauteng on a lateral move, no increase, no nothing, a downgrade even, right? Because I moved from being a head of distribution to being a manager in main market entrenchment. And when that happened, I got here. I really needed to pull my socks up and show up as if nothing was wrong with me because of the fact that everybody dependent on me for me to show up and be able to still provide at home, regardless of what I was going through. And I think that's one of the wrong things that we do as men. Yes, as Liz, we act so tough. Eh? We think it is a match and we rocks, right? And never dealt the emotions and all of that. But I knew that I needed to deliver on this thing. So I dealt the emotions and I still continued to work hard. And that subsequently led to my promotion, which I, like I said, got in the latter year of 2022. And that's how I eventually got to be where I am right now. So yes, The past has been dealt. The wounds are still there, still healing. But that was the challenging moment of my career, Simpiwe. Then you just have to pause for a moment and think, what support was there, right? Who was there rubbing my shoulders? Who was there checking in on me, right? I can tell you now, because of how we show up, most people tend to think that you're great, you're okay, right? And I had to live with that. And until I eventually got fine by myself. But fortunately, like I said, my friends were there to provide the necessary support. But at home, I didn't have the time to go back and cry. I didn't have the time to go back home and really lick my wounds and deal with the emotions because to them, I still needed to be the providing Chad. I still needed to come up and be strong. And I guess that's where I cheated myself from a personal perspective. But that was the challenging part of my career. And that's how I managed to overcome it. And really, it's a good story at the end of the day. It came with the promotions in PU and a bit of bugs. So it was proper, my friend. So those tears of sorrow eventually turned out to be tears of joy. And it's a good story to tell. And I guess for everyone else that may potentially find themselves in a position where you may have either lost a mom recently, may either lost their dad, child, you name it, any loved one that may potentially come to mind. You're still human. You're allowed to basically grieve and do whatever that you need to do in order for you to heal, right? We're all not robots. So you may do what I do, what I did if you have the capability to do that. But eventually, we all are able to get up and try again and put in the necessary effort to still continue with the journey of achieving our goals. So that is my story, Simpiwe. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Chad, and thanks for that question. We needed to hear that part. Harold Awesome also says amazing aspirations. And Harold also say, I am moved by the declarations, Mr. Chad. You give me motivation. And that is the end of our conversation, Chad. I told you it's going to fly, and it
So
did.
early. So early. But I think, Liz, I really appreciate the invite, I guess, into the session. It really feels good to revisit all these nice memories, right? I think to a certain extent, they just showcase the journey that one has traveled to really get to where we are today. And to a certain extent, it somehow shows me that nothing is impossible in life, guys. Right? Really, nothing is impossible in life. For as long as you committed and dedicated to whatever that you aspire to achieve, you can get it. Right? It all requires that you basically just show up, just be Liz, just be Simpiwe or Joseph Rama Falo, and be there. Right. And I guess that's what I did in my particular career journey. My intent was to just show up at all times and make sure that I give the best version of myself at any given time when I have to execute on anything. Thank you, Liz.
So thank you, Chad. I see the people that always said, boosted me, that always said I must meet you. Are here. I never knew Chad for a long time, but everybody's like, you must meet Chad. And then the one time I meet him, I'm like, I know so much about this guy, but I don't even know which part I can. So, this has been great. I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves, those that just want to, off the record, have a conversation with you. Let me